Hey guys. Tonight, we slip between the polished marble columns of ancient Rome, not into a Senate chamber or the roar of the Colosseum, but into something much quieter and far more dangerous a bedroom. The scent of lavender oil lingers in the air. Mingling with candle wax and tension, someone's sandals sit by the door. Someone who doesn't belong here. You duck under the soft canopy of linen sheets. Pulse, quickening. As hushed voices murmur in the dim light. Then knock. Knock. Not a metaphor. That's the law. And you probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background. Hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're in the heart of Augustan Rome, an empire built on power, marble, and an awkward obsession with what consenting adults do after dark. Augustus, the man who carved stability from chaos after Caesar's messy finale, isn't just interested in taxes and legions. He's interested in morals. Specifically, your morals. He worries Rome is going soft too. Greek. Too indulgent. Too full of women with opinions and men with lovers and nobody having enough legitimate babies. His solution: legislate love. Or, more precisely, legislate the consequences when love walks out the front door and sneaks back in through the servant's entrance. And thus, Lex Julia de Adulteriis Coercendis is born one part moral panic, one part population policy, and 100% anxiety-inducing. If you've got secrets tucked under your toga, imagine a modern government tapping into your bedroom with full legal authority and a very enthusiastic uncle watching your windows. That's what Rome became. Not just because Augustus cared, though he did, in a very emperor-knows-best sort of way, but because morality became policy and policy became surveillance. Let's say you're a Roman citizen. Male. Respectable. Married. Your wife. Maybe she's beautiful. Maybe she's dutiful. Maybe she's both. But one day, she starts whispering to a poet with a jawline that could chisel marble. The law now requires you. Not the courts. Not the guards. You to report her. If you don't, you're guilty too. You become a criminal by omission. And she, if caught, she loses her dowry. Hair, dignity. Her home. She might even be exiled to a barren rock, far from the olive groves she once strolled through barefoot. But hey, don't get smug just yet. Adultery isn't just a matter for the married. Even betrothed women can land in hot water. Virginity matters. Reputation matters. Who knew that your love life could become a legal liability? And then there's the courtroom. Yes? Rome puts adultery on trial, with witnesses, often slaves. Though they're technically forbidden from testifying unless tortured. Yes. Tortured. Historians still argue whether this practice was widespread or just theoretical. Either way, it adds a certain flavor to your dinner party if your household staff also doubles as your future prosecutors. You watch a young woman on trial. She's shivering, not from guilt, but from shame. Her lover wealthy, influential, thoroughly unrepentant, barely glances at her. He might face exile for a year or two. She'll lose everything. Unless, of course, she was declared a meretrix, a registered prostitute. Because in a fun twist, once labeled as such, adultery laws no longer apply. Rome considered sex for money legal, but love without permission criminal. So you see, it's not about desire. It's about control, about lineage, about whose child is born into which house. You can almost hear Augustus whispering through the scrolls. Legitimacy is everything. There's a fringe theory that Augustus pushed these laws to shame the elites while boosting his own standing as pater patriae, father of the country. Make no mistake, this wasn't about peasants canoodling in back alleys. The Lex Julia had class. It targeted the elite, the visible, the influencers of their day. Think senators, generals, and their complicated romantic entanglements. Of course, Augustus's own household became Exhibit A. His daughter, Julia the Elder, eventually fell victim to the very laws he championed. But we'll get to her scandalous nights and lonely exile later. For now, you shuffle along Via Sacra, watching as a freedwoman avoids eye contact, and a senator carefully checks who's behind him before entering that ivy-covered villa. Even poets aren't safe. Ovid, our charming, sarcastic bard, ends up exiled to the edge of the empire officially for a poem and a mistake. Historians still debate what exactly the mistake was. Some whisper it involved knowing too much about palace affairs. Others say he taught the wrong noble daughter how to flirt too well. Either way, he's gone. Proof that love in Rome might inspire verse. But it could also get you banished to the Black Sea. And what of the people watching all this unfold? The neighbors, the busybodies? Rome's streets are narrow. Its windows open, and its walls paper thin. Privacy is a myth. If you're going to cheat, you'd better be rich, discreet, or lucky. Ideally all three. You walk back into your insula, passing a baker's wife who's definitely not his wife and definitely not baking bread. You nod. She nods. No words. Just secrets. And the law watches. It always watches. You wake up in a bed that isn't yours, or worse, someone else wakes up beside you. The Roman sun creeps in through wooden shutters, lighting the mosaic floor with a soft gold glow and illuminating your mistake. Footsteps echo down the corridor. You scramble. It's not the husband. Not yet. It's something colder. The law? Because Lex Julia isn't just some dusty statute buried in old scrolls. It's Augustus's favorite moral hammer, designed to fix what he believed was Rome's biggest problem. Too much passion, not enough patriarchy. Rome was many things, but subtle wasn't one of them. When Augustus passed the Lex Julia de Adulterius Coercendis in 18 BCE, he didn't whisper. He carved it in law. You could almost hear him shout, "I want more babies, legitimate ones." The Republic may have collapsed, but its elite still had dinner parties, affairs, and a stubborn disinterest in producing respectable heirs. Augustus needed noble bloodlines to continue. But noble women, they were getting ideas. So here comes Lex Julia. It wasn't just a rule. It was a social revolution. It criminalized adultery for the first time in Roman legal history, not just a sin or a dishonor, but a state offense. You didn't just betray your spouse. You betrayed the empire? Picture it, a married woman, caught in an affair, dragged before a court, Her father might prosecute her. Her husband might face legal penalties if he didn't turn her in. Think about that. If you don't report your wife's cheating, you become a criminal too. Augustus made tattletaling patriotic. And who got a pass? Well, guess what? Men. Or more specifically, married men. Roman husbands could engage with prostitutes. Slaves? Concubines, no problem. But if a wife did the same, that's adultery. That's exile. That's shame, etched into family memory like a bad family crest. Now, let's get into the mechanism. The Lex Julia allowed any citizen to file a public prosecution against an adulterer if the family refused to do so. Yes, random strangers could legally prosecute you for your affair if your dad or husband didn't do it fast enough. It turned betrayal into bureaucracy. And if no one acted within 60 days, well then, hello? Legal vigilantes. There was a brief moment when Rome became a nation of amateur detectives. Curtains twitched. Servants were bribed. Love letters disappeared. The streets hummed with rumors. And courtrooms, they filled up fast. Historians still argue whether this created a wave of actual prosecutions or mostly just scared people straight. Records are sparse. But graffiti tells us what records don't. The people knew. They joked about it. They whispered. And they watched. Even the punishment system had flair. Women could be exiled to desolate islands. Not your scenic Capri, more like a windswept rock where goats outnumber humans. Property was seized. Dowries were returned to fathers. Men, meanwhile, might be exiled briefly or lose their political standing unless they had enough friends in high places. You pass a magistrate reviewing a case. He style scratch parchment slowly. Ease narroweth. The accused woman sobs behind her veil. Her lover stares at the floor. No one mentions love. Only evidence. So, Lex Julia wasn't just about sex. It was about surveillance. Order. Control. You feel it in the stones beneath your feet. In the judgmental glance of every toga-clad passerby. And as you return to your own insula, your own perfectly lawful bed. You wonder, was it worth it? By now, you understand that adultery wasn't just a bedroom problem, it was a courtroom performance. But before the legal drama, before the exile boats and whispered scandals, let's define what actually counted as adultery in Rome. The Roman word for it was adulterium. Simple enough. But the definition, a tangled wreath of cultural logic, the law didn't care if you were in love. It cared about legitimacy, about heirs, about which children inherited what name and whose estate got carved up. So here's the trick. Only certain affairs counted. A married woman sleeping with any man, not her husband, that was adultery. A married man sleeping with another man's wife, also adultery. But the same man could visit brothels, sleep with unmarried women, or use enslaved persons without crossing the legal line, because that wasn't adultery, that was just a Tuesday. And women, well, let's just say they didn't get that kind of flexibility. But here's where it gets spicy. Rome also had categories of women who could be disqualified from protection. The meretrices, or registered prostitutes, weren't protected under the Lex Julia. Neither were actresses, or women who had been caught in adultery before. That's right, once disgraced, you became immune to disgrace. It's a legal paradox. If you've lost honor, you can't lose it again. You're watching a trial. A senator's daughter has been accused. Her father brings the case, weeping performatively as he recounts her shame. Her mother sits stone-faced. The room smells like wax and old anger. And then the lawyer says, but she is no longer a matrona. No longer respectable. Suddenly, she's disqualified. The court buzzes. Because once you fall, there's no law to catch you. It was also about intent. Roman law, ever picky, demanded proof. Not just rumor. You couldn't convict based on gossip alone. You needed a witness. Maybe a note. Maybe a bribe to a doorman. And once you had that, you better move fast. The law gave strict deadlines. Historians still debate how many actual cases were won. How many women were exiled? How many men were truly punished? Because the system wasn't just legal, it was theatrical. Trials weren't just trials. They were social executions. And the biggest twist? Some women leaned into it, turned scandal into power, manipulated the system, became cautionary tales and celebrities. Rome loved a story. And nothing sells like sin. Let's talk about what happens after the affair. Not in your heart. In the Senate. Imagine you're a Roman husband. You walk in on your wife in bed with a man who isn't you. No modern therapy. No dramatic divorce. Instead, the clock starts ticking. You now have 60 days to report the crime, or else, and you can't just tell anyone. You have to drag her to court. Legally. Publicly. With paperwork. It's a situation so awkward. Even Roman playwrights made jokes about it. One satirical line goes, he caught them in the act, but waited until the calendar was free. Yes? Even betrayal needed scheduling. If the husband doesn't act, the wife's paterfamilias, usually her father, must take over. And if he refuses, any citizen can file a charge. Picture your ex's neighbor's cousin reporting your infidelity to the state. Now, let's say the trial happens. The evidence is clear. The witness is bribe-resistant. The verdict, guilty. The man might face a fine or exile, maybe a social freeze-out. The woman. She's banished to a remote island. And not the Pinterest kind, but the real kicker is the husband's obligation to prosecute. If he forgives her, hides the crime, or simply hesitates, he becomes punishable too. Augustus wanted no tolerance, no mercy. Justice with clean fingernails. Some scholars argue this law aimed more at controlling women than truly punishing men. Others say it was a political move to showcase Augustus as the ultimate moral enforcer. A Roman superman with a toga and a very strong opinion on who should sleep with whom. You pause outside the courtroom. Two slaves argue over who saw what. When a young clerk scribbles names somewhere inside. A marriage ends. Quietly, legally, brutally, and Rome keeps spinning. Now let's hear from the woman's side. Step into the sandals of a Roman matrona, a respectable wife. You're draped in stola, pinned with brooches, lips tinted with ochre paste. You look perfect. But inside, you're a breathing legal liability. You walk through the forum with your head high. But every glance, every nod, every whispered salve might carry suspicion. Rome is watching. And worse, so are your slaves. You see, the Lex Julia didn't just police actions. It policed appearance. A woman needed to seem virtuous. Not just be virtuous. The line between grace and disgrace was razor thin. Women were expected to stay indoors, guarded by slaves, loyal to husbands who might not be loyal in return. One Roman satirist joked that a faithful wife was rarer than a phoenix, and the audience laughed. Nervously, you take a wrong step, flirt with a poet, visit a friend's house too often, wear too much perfume and rumors bloom like ivy. You know the law doesn't need love letters, just witnesses. Worse, your own father might use the law against you. Fathers could kill adulterous daughters caught in flagrante delicto under certain conditions. Historians still debate how often this happened. Rare, perhaps, but legal, yes. You sigh. You straighten your veil. You smile politely at a passing senator. You've done nothing wrong. But Rome doesn't care. It only cares that you look like you haven't. You sit still, spine straight, in a domus that smells of incense and political anxiety. The marble under your feet is cold. Your sandals pinching just slightly. You are a Roman wife. You've done nothing wrong, but that doesn't mean you're safe. Because in this world, innocence is a performance. And the role of wife is less about love and more about optics, legacy, and control. It's not that passion is forbidden. Oh, no. Rome loves passion, just not in wives. Passion is for the stage, for poets, for temples of Venus and the wine-slicked whispers of taverns. You, on the other hand, are expected to keep your emotions corseted tighter than your tunic. Your role is to birth citizens and preserve the reputation of your house, not to chase after flute players or sigh at the moon. And yet, you're surrounded by temptation. That charming rhetorician your husband invited over for dinner. The young scribe at the library with the calloused fingers and curious eyes. Even your husband's best friend, especially him. Rome is a city of corridors, of secret glances and servants who never knock. And all the while, the law breathes down your neck like a jealous lover. One joke, scribbled on a Pompeian wall, reads, "She said it was poetry." The law said it was prison. You smile at that? Because it's not wrong. Every day, you must walk the tightrope between dignity and suspicion. If your husband is inattentive or cruel, you endure. Divorce is allowed, but scandalous, especially if initiated by a woman. And anyway, your dowry is tied up in politics. Your children's future depends on staying respectable, whatever that means this season. And it's not just men who enforce the code. Your female peers are often harsher. The matroni in the upper classes police each other with surgical precision. One look too low cut. One laugh too loud at the wrong person's joke. And suddenly, your social calendar clears itself. Historians still argue whether Roman women found subtle ways to resist these constraints. Some whisper of secret sisterhoods, of women sharing information, warning each other, creating hidden networks. Others say no compliance was the only path to survival and rebellion. If it happened, was quiet, invisible. Either way, it's exhausting. You don't just have to be faithful, you have to look it, smell it, radiate it. And even then, a single accusation can undo everything. You sip watered wine, watching your reflection in a polished silver mirror. You see composure, but under that fear, because in Rome, a wife's freedom is a mirror too shiny. brittle and far too easy to crack. Let's say the mirror does crack. The affair is uncovered. The evidence is in. The whispers became witnesses. Now comes the part Rome does with terrifying flair punishment. You find yourself in a court that smells of sweat, papyrus, and roasted garum from a nearby food stall. Your name is on the docket. You're not the only one. The court is crowded today. Rome is cracking down. You stand beside your lover well. Ex-lover now. He looks handsome in a ruined way. You, by contrast, are veiled, guarded, silent. You were once a Matrona. Now, you're a defendant. The Lex Julia de Adulterius prescribes penalties with surgical precision. You may be exiled to Pandateria. If you're highborn, a lonely, goat-filled rock, where even the wind sounds judgmental. You lose your dowry, your civic rights, your status. Your name becomes a whisper. People say over wine. Your lover, depending on his class and connections, might get off lighter. A brief exile to a nicer place, Rhodes. Perhaps somewhere with grapes and poetry. Unless he's low-born, then his fate could be worse. But the worst punishment isn't the island. It's the public shame. Roman street scandal, like a sport. Your case is retold in dinner parties, twisted in forums, mimicked by actors in the theater. You are no longer a person. You are content. And it's not just you. Your family pays. Your father's name is dragged through the streets. Your husband is pitied or mocked. Your children become shadows, avoided by potential suitors. Some penalties are more subtle. You're barred from certain temples. You can't wear specific garments. One poet joket. An adulteress may pray. But Venus turns her face. Historians note that punishments were not always evenly applied. Wealth and power could bend outcomes. If your family was prominent or dangerous, judges hesitated. Rome liked a scandal, but it liked survival more. Yet there's a strange dignity in the fall. Some women, historians, say, own their exile, used it to write, to reflect, to escape. On those windy shores, some found peace in disgrace. Others died forgotten. You look out across the Tiber as the verdict is read. You already know it. The court only confirms what the world decided long ago. Still, you stand tall. You walk to your fate. Because in Rome, dignity might be your last possession, but no one can take it unless you give it. But wait, if the law was so strict, how did so many Romans get away with it? Because, dear listener, Rome might have had laws, but it also had loopholes. You stroll into a domus where the smell of wine hangs heavy, and the laughter is suspiciously performative. The senator hosting tonight is a man known for two things: his good taste in sculpture and his very bad taste in boundaries. His wife quiet, elegant, clever. She knows he has a mistress. Or two, she also knows the law only punishes her. So she smiles, pour wine, and gathers information, because in Rome, silence can be a shield or a sword. You see, the Lex Julia carved exceptions with deliberate vagueness. For one, it didn't touch slaves. If you had sex with a slave, it wasn't adultery. Just another day in the empire. And if the woman involved had already been disgraced, no crime. Which meant some men tried to disqualify their mistresses before prosecution could happen. And if you did get caught, well, there's always the friend in office route. Judges could be swayed, evidence could vanish, witnesses could forget. Some families turned the law into a weapon. Need to get rid of a troublesome wife. Accuse her of adultery. No proof needed, just enough innuendo. A couple of servants, and maybe a gift for the magistrate. Voila! Freedom. With applause. And then there were the public prosecutors. Men who made careers out of accusing others of adultery, especially when a wealthy target meant a better reward. It became performance art. Legal gladiators. But in togas, historians still argue whether these loopholes made the law meaningless or just created a new kind of theater. Some claim the Lex Julia was more symbolic than effective. Others say it altered Roman behavior for generations. But one thing's clear. The law was rigid. Reality wasn't. And in that gap, Rome lived. Now we arrive at the obsession that fueled everything virginity. In the Roman world, virginity wasn't just a virtue. It was an economic asset, a political claim, a family heirloom strapped to your daughter, like a jeweled dagger. Beautiful, valuable, and terrifyingly easy to lose. You sit beside a young girl in a richly painted atrium. She's maybe 12, maybe 14. Her mother is adjusting her hair, murmuring about honor, about expectations. The girl nods, but her eyes dart to the slave boy delivering messages. She's already curious. And in Rome, curiosity kills more than cats. Virginity was assumed until marriage. But the second that veil dropped, any misstep could be labeled adultery. And if a girl was thought to have spoiled herself before marriage, the consequences ranged from severe to ruinous. No dowry, no husband, no future. That's why the pudicitia, or modesty, was idolized. Temples, statues, poems' entire cultural machinery worshipped the ideal of female chastity. Even goddesses weren't spared. Vesta's priestesses had to be virgins or else risk live burial. And what if a girl was assaulted? Roman law made that complicated too. If she didn't scream loud enough, or if it happened in a public place. Her silence could be interpreted as consent. Yes. You heard that right? Historians still debate whether this was widespread enforcement or just legal nightmare fuel. One senator famously divorced his wife not for actual infidelity, but for looking too flirtatious at the baths. He claimed it invited suspicion. The law agreed. Even dreams found safe. One poet jokes that a girl who dreamt of kissing could be judged impure if the wrong priest heard about it. Satire, probably. But it hit close to home. Virginity wasn't about virtue. It was about lineage. Who your child belonged to. Who could inherit. Who could speak in court. You rise, step back into the street, and see the layers now beneath the marble. The laughter. The poetry. Rome is a city built not just on conquest, but on control. And its sharpest weapon, expectation. You're sitting in the Curia Julia, the great Senate House of Rome, and the walls are humming with the smug vibrations of privilege and paranoia. Torgheim's brush marble floors. Senators murmur like cicadas in a grove. Half bored, half watching, and at the center of it all, Augustus Bling. Not Augustus, the god in the making. Not yet. just Gaius Octavius, adopted son of Julius Caesar, conqueror of chaos, restorer of order, and now, surprise moral reformer. You might be wondering, why does the man who tamed the civil wars and built the empire care so much about who's sneaking into whose bed? Because, for Augustus, the battlefield wasn't just Germania or Egypt. It was the Roman family. Rome, in his view, was unraveling. Too many divorces, too few babies, too many freewheeling women with access to salons, poetry, and opinions. The Republic had fallen. Sure, but Augustus feared the soul of Rome might fall next. So, he gathered his advisors, probably sighed dramatically, and decided to fix it with legislation Lex Julia de Maritandis, ordinibus marriage laws, and our main character tonight. Lex Julia de adulterisque recendis. Historians still argue whether he did this out of genuine concern or political convenience. Was Augustus a moralist or a master manipulator who wrapped control in the cloak of virtue? Either way, you're here to witness a strange moment in history when law became love's strangest adversary. Imagine Augustus presenting this to the Senate. Gentlemen, he begins, Rome is suffering because you won't marry your daughters. Or, stay faithful. Oh, res de santerre. It's both accusation and call to arms. He speaks not as a tyrant, but as a father figure, though, he's more disappointed than comforting. The laws are passed. Thunderous applause. Forced or not, statues of modesty appear in forums. Propaganda art floods the streets. Even coinage gets in on it, pudicitia. Modesty incarnate is minted alongside eagles and laurels. You walk through the city, and suddenly, everything's different. Shopkeepers whisper, gossip like currency. Friends clutch secrets behind polite smiles. A single affair could ruin a career. A divorce becomes a scandal. And the worst part, it works. Marriage rates tick up, at least on paper. Some say Augustus's laws forced people back into families, but also deeper into fear. His own family wasn't spared. Julia, the elder, his daughter, beautiful, brilliant, and wildly non-compliant, would soon become a symbol of both defiance and failure. But not yet. For now, the system is in place. The rules are clear. You exhale into this newly moral Rome, where bedsheets carry the weight of the empire and love. Once wild and Roman, now files its paperwork. Now that the rules are clear, let's get this straight. They're not fair. Especially not for you if you're a man. But wait. You say, didn't the Lex Julia criminalize all adultery? Technically, yes. Realistically, it's complicated. Let's take a walk through a tablinum. The office of a typical Roman aristocrat. You see him sipping wine, reading a scroll. Legs crossed like he owns the concept of furniture. He's married. Of course. His wife is probably weaving or managing the household. He's had dinner with her. Shared children. Maybe even affection. But now he's off to visit a miratrix. Or a slave. Or the widowed neighbor who bakes the best honey cakes and never asks questions. And legally, that's all fine. You blink. How? Because adultery, Roman style, only happens when you sleep with a married woman, not your wife. As long as your partner is unmarried, socially inferior, or registered in certain professions, you're in the clear. It's a loophole the size of the Colosseum. That's why historians often note the Lex Julia wasn't about morality in general. It was about regulating women's sexuality. It didn't aim for sexual equality. It aimed for political order through lineage control. You overhear a joke at a bathhouse? A man can plant seeds in any field, but a woman must guard her garden. Everyone laughs. You don't? Wives had to be chaste. Husbands just had to be discreet. You follow our aristocrat as he heads home. His wife asks no questions. She knows the rules. Knows the law won't defend her if she complains. She also knows, disturbingly, that she could be punished if she sought her own relief. But here's a little fringe detail: some men were punished. Rarely, and usually only if they provoked a scandal or touched a married woman with enough status to make noise. Then exile, or forced retirement, or, at worst, loss of rank. Historians still debate whether this was hypocrisy or just the Roman understanding of mos maiorum, the customs of the ancestors. Did they think men couldn't be faithful? Or that it simply didn't matter? You wander home under the Roman moonlight, feeling the weight of that double standard. Rome might be grand, but fairness never quite made the forum. Let's step back into the grand, ominous halls of the Roman Domus and listen to the footsteps of the one man who mattered most behind every Roman family decision, the paterfamilias. He's not just a father, he's a patriarch in the fullest sense. He owns the house, the land, the slaves, and, legally speaking, everyone in his family, including you. And under the Lex Julia, his role becomes even more powerful and even more terrifying. You're seated in the atrium, watching as a young woman, his daughter, is led in. She's Pal. Her lover was caught, her veil torn. The servants told, there's no trial yet. First, she must answer to him. No. Here's the twist. If he caught her in flagrante delicto in the very act of adultery, Roman law gave him extraordinary power. He could kill her. On the spot. No judge. No jury. Just the paterfamilias and his right to protect the family honor. He could kill the lover. 2. But only if the man was of low status. A slave. A performer. A gladiator. If the lover was a senator, better prepare for court. Not vengeance. Historians still argue whether this was ever truly applied or merely symbolic. But symbol or not, its message was clear. Family honor is law, and the father is the lawgiver. Even outside of the bedroom, his reach was vast. He arranged marriages, could annul them, controlled dowries, inheritances, guardianships. A Roman child remained under his patria potestas until the father died or released them. Imagine being 40 and still needing dad's permission to legally sell a field. Now imagine being a woman who's just been accused of adultery. Facing this man who owns your future? Sometimes, the paterfamilias chose mercy. Other times silence. But many chose prosecution, either out of duty or desperation. You slip through the back corridors of this domus as the shouting rises. A decision is being made. A life is changing. And the empire watches, not through windows or laws, but through him. You've probably been waiting for this one, Julia the Elder. Daughter of Augustus. jewel of the Julian line, raised to be Rome's ideal woman, married off strategically, first to Marcellus, then to Agrippa, and finally to Tiberius. Every union was political, every child a future heir. And yet, despite all the titles, all the ceremony, Julia wanted something. Rome refused her freedom. You peek behind the curtains of her palace on the Palatine Hill. Lavish feasts, laughter, poetry, and whispered affairs. Plural. With poets, senators, friends of her husband, enemies of her father. Augustus tried to ignore it. For a while, but the gossip spread. Publicly, loudly. Julia, daughter of the emperor, was mocking the Lex Julia. Augustus was trapped. He'd made the law. His daughter broke it. What could he do? He did what Rome demanded. He exiled her to Pandateria, a desolate island with no vineyards, no poetry, and absolutely no lovers. She was stripped of her titles, forbidden contact with her children. A former jewel, now an embarrassment. Some historians believe she was framed, others argue she flaunted the law knowingly. Perhaps both are true. Either way, her exile became the most famous punishment under Lex Julia. But that's not the end. Augustus never forgave her. Tiberius never visited. Julia died forgotten, her name erased from family triumphs. And yet, she left a shadow. Every Roman woman knew the story. Every poet sighed her name. Every whisper of rebellion echoed her choices. And so, in exile, Julia became something more than a scandal. She became a symbol. You're inside a palace tonight. But not the cozy kind. This is no family dining room with warm olive oil and laughter. No. This is the Palatium. Heart of imperial Rome, where silk hides knives and every embrace carries the weight of dynastic intrigue. The ceilings are painted with gods. But the floors, they remember everything. Because now we're not just talking about citizens or senators. We're talking about emperors. And emperors are supposed to obey the laws they write. But guess what? They didn't. Not even close. Let's be clear. Augustus enforced the Lex Julia harshly on others, but when it came to the men who followed him, well, hypocrisy is the true Roman tradition. You peek through the curtain. There's Tiberius. Sullen and brooding. A man who enforced moral laws, but later abandoned Rome for the island of Capri, where rumors dripped thicker than wine. Whispers of orgies, of minors, of cruelty that even ancient historians hesitated to detail. Was it slander? Maybe. Historians still argue whether the darker tales were exaggerated by his political enemies, but even his supporters agree Tiberius was not exactly celibate. And then Caligula. Oh, Caligula, the poster child of imperial adultery. If ever there was one. He allegedly slept with senators' wives, boasted about it in public, and forced husbands to attend. One story claims he turned the palace into a brothel. Another that he declared his sister a goddess, and possibly more. Again, how much of it is true? Hard to say. But Roman historians certainly believed it, which tells you something about imperial rumor culture. Claudius, Hetride, Ernest. Scholarly Claudius married Messalina, a woman who became Rome's most infamous adulteress. One afternoon, She reportedly competed with a prostitute to see who could sleep with more men in a single night. Messalina won. Claudius didn't laugh. Instead, he had her executed. You step lightly through this bizarre gallery of rulers and their tangled sheets, each of them, technically, the guardian of Rome's moral laws. Each of them, in some form, spectacularly in violation of those same laws. Nero married his male slave, staged theatrical weddings, seduced the wives of his enemies, then the enemies themselves, and burned through partners like wax in summer. Yet he too spoke of virtue. In public, at least. Here's the strange thing. While ordinary citizens were dragged into court over love letters, emperors rewrote the rules. What was adultery for others became entertainment for them. They didn't break the law. They simply became the exception. Rome tolerated it, resented it, whined about it in satire and scrolls. But it continued. You can almost hear a senator whisper in the dark, "What use are morals if gods ignore them?" And that's the paradox. The closer you get to power, the less the rules seem to apply. The law lives on in scrolls. But the emperors, they lived above it. Or so they thought. Because history, dear listener, remembers, you're standing at the edge of a senate, hearing not the grand ones with marble speeches and raised arms, but something quieter, sharper. There's a hush in the room, like someone's about to draw a blade. The man on trial isn't a criminal in the usual sense. He hasn't stolen, or murdered, or incited riot. He's been accused of adultery. But that's not why the chamber is tense. The real reason, he's politically inconvenient. Welcome to one of Rome's nastiest habits, using adultery as a weapon not just to enforce morality, but to destroy rivals. You might think these laws were about virtue, about civic responsibility. And for everyday Romans, maybe they were. But for the elites, they were a chessboard. The Lex Julia gave ambitious men a tool sharper than any gladius accusation. You follow a young senator through a side door into court. His opponent is older, more connected, but recently widowed under suspicious circumstances. A few quiet payments, a bribed servant or two. And suddenly the older man's name is being dragged through a courtroom, not for treason, but for adultery? Did he sleep with a noble's wife? Maybe, maybe not. Doesn't matter now. You see, adultery trials were public, loud, and deeply damaging. The mere suggestion could poison reputations. A conviction could end careers. Remove inconvenient in-laws. Break alliances. Even void a will. One famous case involved a consul whose inheritance was challenged on the grounds that his mother had committed adultery before his birth, rendering him illegitimate. It didn't work. But it came close. Because in Rome, even your mother's sins could be retroactively weaponized against you. Historians still argue whether Augustus foresaw this darker use of his law. Some say yes. It gave him plausible deniability to remove rivals. Others say it backfired, creating a culture of blackmail and slander that poisoned political discourse. You lean in as another senator's name is read aloud, followed by a list of supposed lovers. None present. All conveniently unavailable. The jury shifts. The verdict is clear. Guilty or not, doesn't matter. He won't be voting in the next election. And that, in Rome, is the real punishment. Now, here's where the hypocrisy hits full volume. You're walking past a dimly lit lupanar. A Roman brothel, its doorway discreet but unmistakable. Inside candles, silk, and soft music. The smell of oil and skin, and no law enforcement in sight? Because here's the twist in Rome. Prostitution was perfectly legal, institutionalized, taxed, and, in its way, respected. You just had to register. So, let's unpack the absurdity. If a woman was paid for sex and declared a meretrix and a professional, she could sleep with a dozen men a night and still avoid prosecution. But if a married woman fell in love and had one clandestine affair, exile, shame, ruin. You blink. Yes. It's real. The Lex Julia punished adulterium. Not fornication, meaning casual sex between unmarried partners wasn't necessarily illegal, even when it was frowned upon. It didn't carry exile. But sleeping with a married woman, crime, and for a married woman to sleep with anyone, not her husband, absolute catastrophe. So, in a grim workaround, some women, particularly of lower status, registered themselves as prostitutes not to sell sex, but to protect themselves from prosecution. You heard that right? They self-labeled as fallen to avoid worse fates. Affront jusque là. On script, in Rome. Virtue was not about chastity. It was about paperwork. And then there's the clientele. Senators. Merchants. Generals? Some even kept mistresses on official stipends. A few inscribed their names in love poems on public walls. I loved Fabia. And the gods forgive me. The gods. Maybe, but not the court, if Fabia happened to be married. You stand in the brothel's doorway. A girl greets you not ashamed, not desperate, but businesslike. She knows the law, knows her protections. Her freedom is thin. But in some ways, it's more than a Matrona's. Historians debate whether this legalized contradiction served as a pressure valve or a trap. Did it allow sexual freedom for men while criminalizing emotional bonds for women? Did it empower certain classes at the expense of others? The answers are complex. But the effect is clear. Rome didn't hate sex. It hated unpredictability. And marriage, in Rome, was meant to be predictable. Even if it wasn't, you step out of the brothel and into a courtyard, sun-drenched, modest, buzzing with gossip. Because while emperors decreed and senators postured, the true enforcers of the Lex Julia lived next door. Let's meet your neighbor. She's in her 50s. Sharper than a stylus, nose like a hawk, and blessed with an endless supply of errands that happen to pass by your window. She knows who visits, when, how long they stay. She's the unofficial morality police. And she's not alone. All over Rome. Neighbors are watching. In apartment blocks insulae. In villas. Even in country estates. Surveillance wasn't just top-down. It was horizontal. Everyone monitored everyone. And in a legal system where public accusation was a civic duty that made every street a courtroom, you catch snippets as you pass. Her husband was away last week. And that poet came by twice. They closed the shutters at midday. She burned incense after the meal. Everyone knows what that means. None of it proves anything. But in Rome, perception often outweighed truth. Some men hired private informants delatores to spy on wives or enemies. These weren't lowlifes. They were professionals. Some even became rich. Others were hated so much that statues were erected to curse their names. Historians still argue whether this neighborly vigilance actually reduced adultery or merely drove it deeper underground. But one thing is certain: it turned Roman society into a nest of secrets and soft-footed liars. You think of the servants? 2. They carried messages, opened doors, knew which sandals didn't belong. Yet their testimony in court was limited. To use a slave's account, you needed torture, an unsettling legal requirement that said more about Rome's priorities than its humanity. Still, many testified, some from loyalty, some from pressure, some for freedom. You step into your own courtyard now, wary of shadows. Even love letters feel heavier, like they carry fines. You smile politely at your neighbor. She smiles back, but her eyes have already counted your visitors. You creep down a side alley in Subura, Rome's Dense, rumbling lower district, where laundry flaps like banners of gossip and every window opens into someone else's business. And tonight, business is booming because you're about to learn how clever Romans bent their own laws. Let's say you've been accused of adultery. You're wealthy, smart, and a little panicked. But don't worry, Rome loves a loophole. The Lex Julia may be rigid, but it was written by humans. And humans, especially Roman humans, are very good at finding cracks. Your first option, delay. The law says a husband has 60 days to bring charges before a third party can prosecute. That's time enough to bribe a witness. Threaten a servant. Or conveniently send your wife off to the countryside. Preferably somewhere remote, with no nosy neighbors or public baths. If you're the wife, you might feign illness, retreat into deep mourning, claim divine punishment, and seek sanctuary in a temple, because even Rome hesitated to arrest someone clinging dramatically to a statue of Juno. Temporarily. But let's go deeper. Suppose you're a father who wants to prosecute your daughter, but not until your political rival is discredited. Easy. Just sit on the accusation. Let it ripen like rotten cheese. Bring it to court during a key election, when your opponent's son is up for a magistracy. Timing is everything. And if you're the accused man, there's always the "she wasn't married" defense. Or, "we were betrothed" a gray zone, Rome never fully clarified. Or, "she was a prostitute." Even if she wasn't, because, legally, if she was, adultery didn't count. It sounds awful, because it is. But it worked. You sit in a tavern, listening to a lawyer explain how he got a senator's son acquitted. We claim the servant who testified wasn't tortured properly. Everyone laughs. Another adds, "We said the husband had forgiven her." No forgiveness. No, crime. More laughter. Historians still argue whether these strategies were common knowledge or elite tricks. Some sources suggest manuals of legal manipulation circulated among the upper class, how to survive a scandal in 5 easy steps. Others believe it was all situational, improvised by silver tongues and golden bribes. But the result, a system where guilt was fluid, punishment negotiable, and the law, like the Tiber, flowed around whatever it couldn't crush. You finish your wine. Somewhere, a trial ends. The verdict, not guilty, but the truth that never entered the courtroom. Tonight, we slip behind a velvet curtain, past the grand atriums and judgmental temples, into the backbones of Rome's best-kept secrets, the servant corridors, the passageways that don't echo, the doors that never creak, Because no affair happens in silence. Not here. Not in Rome. Behind every scandal is a trail of linen to be folded, letters to be carried, sandals to be hidden. And behind those, someone watching. Let's meet the familia. The enslaved workers who made the domus function and made the affairs possible. Imagine you're a young maidservant. You deliver wine to the triclinium, sweep ashes from the hearth, then sneak a wax tablet from the wife to a handsome visitor across the street. You know what's happening. You've seen the looks, heard the late footsteps. You also know the law. And it terrifies you. Because if your mistress is caught, your body could be the next to suffer. Roman courts allowed slave testimony in adultery trials, but only under torture. Yes, that was the legal condition. Your word was admissible only if extracted through pain. Not because the Romans liked cruelty for its own sake, but because they believed slaves would only tell the truth if tortured. Historians still shudder at this. Some argue it wasn't always used. Others say it was standard. Either way, it was legal and lethal. So you learn discretion, or you learn to pick sides. Some servants protected their mistresses, hid lovers in cellars, distracted husbands. Others betrayed them, sometimes out of fear, sometimes for freedom, sometimes for money. One whispered name could end a marriage and ignite a courtroom. There's a famous case where a doorman was bribed with a silver cup to open the side gate and then paid twice as much to tell the husband about it. Rome didn't run on virtue. It ran on value. You pause near a side door. A breath of wind. A flash of movement. A young man slips inside, guided by a familiar hand. The maid closes the curtain, then vanishes. Rome is a city built on stone, but it survives on secrets. And every secret needs a servant. You're seated at the back of a Roman courtroom. It's hot, airless, the scent of sweat, perfume, and fresh wax swirls like some kind of moral stew. On the marble bench, a woman sobs. Not quietly. This is a performance. She knows it's not enough to be innocent. She has to look innocent. And across from her, her lover, or formé à lover, or alleged lover. No one's sure anymore. He stares at his feet. This isn't a murder trial, but it feels like one, because an adultery trial in Rome wasn't just about facts. It was about optics. Who looked ashamed? Who looked angry? Who arrived with a father? Who didn't? You listen as the accuser speaks her husband, stiff with rage, carefully reciting what he was told by the slave who was bribed by the neighbor who once saw a sandal in the wrong hallway. The magistrate nods. No one says the word love. The penalty, if she's found guilty, exile, Propertiseitsur, disgrace. He might lose his Senate seat if he's seen as complicit, but right now, he's cast as the injured husband. A good role. Politically, there's an air of theater. Even the audience knows their cues. They gasp. Whisper. Shift dramatically. The court is half legal, half social punishment. And the verdict. It lands like thunder. Guilty. The woman collapses. The guards move in. Her veil is removed, part of the shame ritual. Her name is struck from official registers. She's to be put on a boat to the Pontine Islands. Some historians believe women sometimes faked emotional breakdowns to gain sympathy. Others say the trauma was real because the outcomes were real. There was no appeal, no path back. But some didn't go quietly. One woman, a senator's wife, stood at her sentencing and said, "Better to fall in love than fall in line." She was whipped before exile, but her words lived on, passed through taverns, scratched into tiles, remembered. You leave the courtroom. The light outside feels wrong. The whole world has shifted. Because once an accusation begins, no one walks away unchanged. You're walking through the ruins of Pompeii now. Ashes, frozen mid-motion. And for the first time tonight, you're surrounded, not by whispers, but by shouts. On the walls, graffiti. It's everywhere. Scrawled in charcoal, scratched into plaster, traced with broken tiles. And what do Romans write when no one's watching sex jokes? Love confessions, warnings, insults. It's the real Rome. The Rome of ordinary people, unfiltered by senators or marble, or Lex Julia scrolls. And it's deliciously irreverent. One reads, "Marcellus was here, and so was Antonia." Twice. Another, "Don't trust Clodia. She takes lovers and coin." A third, charmingly honest. "I dreamt of Livia and woke up happy." You pause by a wall that says, "Virtue is for statues." Well, that says it all. Historians treasure this graffiti because it reveals what court records don't, how people felt about the laws, and how they resisted them through laughter, through poetry, through crude doodles of what exactly Marcellus and Antonia might have been doing. The Lex Julia may have threatened exile, but humor offered survival. Some walls even mocked the trials themselves. One near the amphitheater reads, "He accused her while lying in his lover's bed." Another adds, "The judge smiles like he's never sinned." You step further into the city. A bakery, a brothel, a bathhouse. More walls. Malvoisin? Rome never needed paper. It had stone. You reach a corner where the graffiti fades. A final note reads, "She wept. Helaide. The gods saw." It's not legal precedent, but it's truer than most scrolls. Because in Rome, truth lived, not in courts, but in shadows, and on walls. You step into the chill of a temple at dawn, soft incense coiling around your ankles, like the breath of something older than the city itself. It's quiet here, quiet in the way only sacred places are. The kind of silence that doesn't wait for you to speak, but dares you to, tonight. You're going to explore one of Rome's more peculiar contradictions. How adultery wasn't just a legal crime or social disgrace, it was also a religious offense. Because while the Lex Julia handed out exile, the gods withheld forgiveness, especially Venus. There were temples you couldn't enter if you'd been convicted of adultery. Yes, barred from sacred space, from prayer, from public piety. Imagine walking by a procession and seeing your name whispered just loud enough to hear, "She can't join." She was judged, not just scandalous, but ritually polluted. The Vestal Virgins untouchable. Literally, adultery for them, well, that wasn't exile. That was death. Buried alive. To be precise, in a chamber with a lamp. Bread. And milk, not because they broke a law, but because they defiled the city's spiritual core, Their bodies symbolized Rome itself pure, protected, inviolate. Once touched, that illusion cracked, and Rome did not forgive, even outside the temple. The consequences were spiritual. Certain public rites barred women with tainted honor. The Matronalia, festival of wives and mothers, welcomed only the respectable, not the rumored, not the punished. Historians still argue whether this blending of civic and sacred power was deliberate strategy or simply cultural osmosis. Was Augustus using divine shame to bolster state law? Or did Roman religion just absorb morality like it did everything else? Some fringe theories even suggest that Augustus consulted the Sibylline oracles before enforcing Lex Julia. If true, that would mean his sexual crackdown came not just from policy, but from prophecy. And the people, they understood. One inscription near the Temple of Juno reads, "She who betrays her bed must not touch the goddess's steps." No signature, just truth, chiseled in stone. You watch a woman step up to offer flowers at an altar. She pauses. Hears the whispers, lowers her hand. The petals fall to the ground. You're back in a Roman courtroom, not as a senator, not as a poet, but as a body, a slave. And you're about to learn how the Lex Julia didn't apply equally or even humanely across classes. Let's say your mistress is caught in adultery. You know, because you helped. You ran the notes. You opened the back gate. You saw it happen. But your testimony is useless, unless they torture you. Roman law viewed slaves not as citizens, but as property, tools. You couldn't legally commit adultery because you couldn't marry. Your body wasn't yours. Therefore, you couldn't betray anyone with it. But you could be used, and if your owner's wife was accused, your body became evidence. To be clear, you're not guilty. You're just nearby, and that proximity might cost you everything. Historians still shiver at the way Roman courts treated slave testimony. Even respected jurists, men quoted for centuries, argued that pain was the only path to truth, that without it, slaves would lie out of loyalty, or fear, or self-preservation. So in cases of adultery, judges ordered torture, sometimes in private, sometimes in open court. One chilling record mentions a maid who was tortured without end until she changed her story, then punished again for inconsistency. There's no plaque for her, no name, just a footnote. And the masters, they watched, used the outcome, then replaced the body. Some slaves fought back, subtly, feeding false stories, accusing the wrong people, playing dumb. These quiet rebellions rarely succeeded, but when they did, they rippled. A famous case involves a young man named Philo who endured torture without speaking. The court couldn't convict. The woman was released. Later, she bought his freedom. Love, maybe. Guilt, probably. But resistance, absolutely. You pass a statue in the forum. The plaque reads, "Justice?" She holds scales, but she doesn't wear a blindfold. Because in Rome, justice sees class and only punishes downward. Now let's step off the marble and into quieter rooms, the ones filled with widows, divorcées, and all the women the Lex Julia left in limbo. You are at a gathering of Roman women, not temple priestesses or imperial daughters, just a group of ladies who once wore wedding rings and now wear shadows. Some divorced, Some wither with. Some simply never married. And all of them walking a tightrope. Because in Rome, being unmarried didn't make you free. It made you vulnerable. Let's talk about the divorcee. She might have left for good reason. A cruel husband. A barren marriage. Even a mutual agreement. But to society, she's now a woman without an anchor. And worse, she's now watched. Any visitor to her house, any new hairstyle, any laughter too loud. All signs that she might be sliding toward adultery. Or already there. Then there's the widow. She should be safe. Right? Revered. But not always. Especially if she's young. Wealthy. And childless. Rome believes such women to be dangerously tempting attracting suitors. Disrupting dynasties. And possibly rekindling old flames that were never quite extinguished. The Lex Julia technically didn't punish adultery in the unmarried. But if you were once married, or intended to marry, or even looked like someone's future wife, the whispers followed. You meet a woman named Antonia. Twice divorced. Clever. She hosts literary salons. Serves wine. Has a laugh like a bell tower. And every man in Rome wants her and fears her. Because Antonia knows things, and worse. She says them. No one dares accuse her directly, but they watch. Closely. Waiting. Historians debate whether these women found ways to thrive. Some say they turned their status into a kind of social immunity. Others claim they were just delaying exile. Either way, they played the game better than most. You sip watered wine and watch Antonia wink at a young orator? He blushes. She laughs. The room smiles. But outside, the street waits. The torchlight flickers. The crowd rustles. You're at the back of a Roman theater, not for tragedy, not for satire, but for comedy. And tonight's play, adultery. It's everywhere in Roman drama, from Plautus to Terence. The cheating wife trope was as reliable as bad weather in Britannia. She's cunning. She's loud. She outwits her husband. Seduce a lover, tricks her maid, and ends up mostly unpunished but always laughed at. You listen as the actor prances across stage, hips swaying. The audience roars. It's a man. Of course. In costume. Playing a woman. Playing a joke. Because what better way to remind society of its values than by mocking the ones who break them, the humor's body. The innuendo layered. The satire cuts deep. A character says, "My wife's virtue lasts until noon." Another replies, "Then bless the sun. It keeps no secrets." The audience howls. But beneath the laughter, you feel something else. The discomfort of recognition, because many in the crowd know someone like her. Or someone like her. Or fear becoming her. And the playwright, he knows it too. Historians suggest that Roman theater served not just as entertainment, but as a pressure valve, letting citizens laugh at what they feared, criticize what they endured, and process what they couldn't say aloud. One scholar even called it therapy disguised in wine and applause. You think about the woman from section 20, the one who said, "Better to fall in love than fall in line." She would have laughed here. Laughed hard. The play ends. The crowd claps. The actors bow. You walk home, half smiling, but something lingers. Because when comedy ends, the laws don't. You're on a creaky cart, rattling its way across the rocky edges of the Roman world past vineyards, past sleepy towns, past aqueducts so old they seem grown from the hills themselves. The air shifts. Accents change. You're no longer in the heart of Rome. You're in the Provinciae, and suddenly, everything about adultery starts to sound different. Let's say you're in Gaul, or Egypt, or Syria. The locals here follow Roman law. Technically, the paterfamilias still rules the household, and the Lex Julia applies. But enforcement, that's a whole different story. In the provinces, Roman moral laws meet local traditions, and the result is a cultural stew where adultery looks familiar, yet foreign. In parts of Egypt, long influenced by Greek customs, women held more public visibility. In Syria, local family honor might override Roman legal procedures. And in Gaul, well, let's just say some Celtic customs found Roman rigidity amusing. You attend a trial in a provincial town. The magistrate is Roman. Yes, but half his jury speaks a different dialect. And more than one eyebrow is raised at the idea of exiling a woman for the wrong visitor. A few even smirk. Their wives have lovers too. That's not a scandal. It's a Tuesday. Historians still argue how strictly Lex Julia was enforced outside Italy. In major colonies like Carthage or Alexandria, more likely, in backwater towns clinging to Roman identity with wine-stained scrolls, far less. There's even a record of one governor who flat out ignored an adultery charge, saying, "Let Rome worry about bedsheets. I'll worry about taxes." Honest men. But it wasn't all comedy. In some cases, provincial governors weaponized the Lex Julia, used it to remove local elites who got too comfortable. You accuse a native priestess of adultery. Suddenly, her temple's yours. Her supporters discredited. It's control disguised as virtue. You ride into the next town. The innkeeper pours you wine and tells you about his cousin's neighbor's mistress who used to be a Roman citizen until she slept wrong. You chuckle. You sip. And you realize, in Rome, the Lex Julia was law. In the provinces, it was theater. Sometimes farce, sometimes tragedy, but always a performance. You're deep in the stacks of a dusty old library now, scrolls and codices piled like bones. Ink faded, but still breathing. You run your fingers over brittle parchment. Eyes scanning, for one thing, the truth. Because as you've probably guessed by now, historians still don't agree on what all of this meant. Did the Lex Julia actually work? Or was it just imperial noise? Some argue it had real bite pointing to exile records. Property-Zeichers. Even revisions under later emperors, like Tiberius. Others shrug. Symbolic. They say, Rome loved to talk about virtue. Practicing it, less so. The numbers don't help. No complete trial logs. No tidy charts. Just fragments, legal commentaries, gossip from satirists, graffiti, imperial edicts, and the odd census note that shows a sudden marital status change. Some scholars think the law backfired, that it pushed adultery underground, created more fear than fidelity, that it turned Rome into a nation of spies, not saints. Others believe it marked a cultural shift, that for the first time, private morality became public business, that Augustus changed not just the law, but how Romans thought about sex. Family. Power. One fringe theory even claims that the Lex Julia was a form of soft eugenics, designed to increase the birth rate among elites, while discouraging lower-class procreation through stigma and punishment. It sounds harsh, but Augustus was obsessed with family lines. And politics rarely plays nice. What's clear is this: the law left a mark. On literature, on theater, on memory, and on you. You unroll one last scroll. It's Ovid, exiled poet. Mocking moralists with sugar-dipped venom, you condemn our passions, but only after dark. You smile? Because no matter what the historians say, the truth is rarely pure. And in Rome, it was never simple. Let's exhale a little. Shall we step back from the scrolls and courtrooms and whispering neighbors? Close your eyes and feel it Rome's heartbeat. Because all this, these laws, trials, scandals, it wasn't just about punishment. It was about obsession. With love, with control, with imagining what happens in someone else's bed. And so we enter the realm of poetry, of myth, of raw imagination. Where Rome didn't legislate sex, it painted it, sung it, feared it. You stroll through a villa in Pompeii. Its walls covered in frescoes. One shows Venus rising from the sea. Another shows Mars and Venus caught in bed by Vulcan's net, a story told again and again by Romans. Because they loved the irony. Gods cheat. Gods get humiliated, and yet people still pray to them. You read Catullus, who writes about Lesbia with both devotion and venom. Or Propertius, who compares his lover to conquered cities. These men celebrated adultery even as their laws criminalized it. It's schizophrenic but brilliant, because Rome didn't hate love. It just wanted to own it, to direct it, to say, you can desire, but only like this. You can marry, but only them. You can lust, but under our terms. Even domestic imagery played along. The ideal Roman wife was both chaste and charming, submissive and smart, fertile and silent. En impossible mix. No wonder so many plays ended in either divorce or disguise. You sip pomegranate wine beside a mosaic of Leda and the Swan, another myth of love and power, violence and beauty. Historians note that this contradiction between Rome's rules and its art wasn't hypocrisy. It was harmony. Two sides of the same impulse to control and to feel. You rise, stepping past the mural. The goddess watches and says nothing. You're in a dusty old church now. Bells toll somewhere distant, and you're centuries from Rome's glory, but not far from its shadow. Because the Lex Julia didn't vanish. It morphed. After the empire fell, Christian thinkers took up the Roman moral baton. But where Augustus had written laws, the church wrote sins. The obsession remained, but the punishment changed. Adultery became a soul crime, confessable, damnable, redeemable, if you were lucky. The church preserved the idea that a woman's body symbolized order, that her fidelity mirrored divine obedience. That same control dressed now in robes instead of togas. You trace the echo through medieval codes, canon law, Carolingian edicts, English common law, over and over. The same ideas resurface, protect marriage, punish deviation, preserve legitimacy, even into the Renaissance. when women were accused not of adultery, but witchcraft. And often, the stories overlapped. Love potions, night visitors, forbidden trusts, all sins. Now, spiritual. Historians map this legal DNA from Rome to Byzantium to the Catholic confessional. The Lex Julia left no children, but plenty of heirs. You sit beside a medieval scribe who copies old Roman statutes with quiet reverence. He doesn't fully understand them, but he knows they're important, that they bind society. And when you glance at modern law codes Italy, France, even parts of the U.S., you see it again? The impulse to regulate the private, to legislate a desir. Rome never really died. It just changed forms. You exhale. The bells stop. The silence is not peaceful. It's judgment. You lie down now on a soft Roman couch, or maybe just a modern bed. Doesn't matter. The lights are low. The wine is gone. The scrolls are closed. And still, something lingers. Maybe it's the breath of Venus, still warm in your ear. Maybe it's the sound of sandals outside a guilty window. Or maybe it's just the weight of 2,000 years of watching. Because what the Lex Julia gave Rome was not justice, not peace, but memory. A law that criminalized desire, that tried to name what love is and punish what it isn't. A law that turned hearts into evidence and pillows into courtrooms, and somehow, it still echoes. In the stories we tell, in the jokes we make, in the shame we carry. So tonight, as the city sleeps, whether it's Rome or wherever you are, remember this. The empire wasn't built on laws. It was built on secrets. The candles have gone out. The whispers are gone. Even the gods have closed their eyes. You lie back now, in the stillness of this ancient, echoing night. The scandals are over. The judgments silenced. No more exile. No more trials. No more eyes peering through curtained windows. Just quiet. The law may have punished lovers, but it never truly understood them. It wrote their names on scrolls, sentenced them to islands, whispered them out of history, but their hearts kept beating. Somewhere, in poems, in laughter, in fading footprints across mosaic floors, and as you drift deeper, you feel the marble crumble beneath you. Rome is falling, but not all at once. It falls softly now, like petals, like ash, like a sigh. You breathe in, slowly. The air is cool, still, safe. There are no more prosecutions. No need for lawyers or scribes. No servants listening at doors. Just you, floating between the past and the present. Between what was judged and what was felt. Let it go. Let the laws fade. Let the memory of empire become nothing more than the weight of history dissolving into sleep. You are far from the forum now. Far from the noise. Just stars. Just silence. Just breath. Sleep well. Roman heart. Sleep deep.